So for IQ, what I discovered, at least in Texas, is that at least one of the programs is based on eligibility includes IQ level, and it needs to be at either 70 or 75. Well, what happens is with DMD, typically you don't think of having IQ issues or intellectual disability, but one of the previous YouTubes that I've seen that Lindy has hosted was with Dr. Natalie Truba, and she discussed comorbidity being pretty high, the rate of comorbidity being pretty high with kids that have DMD. And so with Duchenne, there may be a second diagnosis. And if there is an issue with capacity, then go ahead and get it's called a DID, Determination of Intellectual Disability. And to be eligible for some programs that eligibility is based on IQ, you would have to have the IQ tested at a authorized place, which would be the local authority. So again, in Harris County, you would contact the Harris Center. So contact Health and Human Services and see where they would like you to go for a free determination of intellectual disability for your child.
And let's jump into the next one. So for Leona, at least in Texas, the assets for the individual to be approved is limited at $2,000. So tell us, how in the world are we going to get our child when we've got people who give them gifts, and we've got vans, and we've got well-meaning grandparents? How are we going to keep our child's assets at $2,000 or less legally?
legally. Okay, I like one ability, one thing that you would use is something called a supplemental needs trust. Now, there's multiple types of supplemental needs trust. We have first party, and then we have third party. We also, if your state has a nonprofit that may run something called a pooled trust, but you would go to an attorney and you would ask for the drafting of a third party supplemental needs trust. What it is it's an agreement that let's say it's 2 parents and 1 child with DMD. So the parents would be the initial grantors, putting down $100 or something towards the consideration for that agreement. Then what you have is parents as the initial trustees. So for parents that are going to fund that trust before they die, they would be in charge of distributing the assets or managing the assets. When I'm drafting special needs trust or supplemental needs trust, I ask for at least a couple of sets of successor trustees, because I want to make sure that this trust, you have decided who would be in charge of this trust, so that it will cover your child's benefits, or it would protect your child's benefits for the rest of your child's life. And that is important for third party supplemental needs trust. It's its own separate entity. It has its own tax ID number. And what you would do is you would list the supplemental needs trust in your wills. You would list instead of your child, because your child is not supposed to own any assets or anything over $2,000. You would want the trust to be what you designate as a beneficiary in your life insurance policies. Because if your child inherits from you or gets life insurance, a payout, cash is an asset. And so if they inherit more than $2,000, then they will be kicked off of they can be kicked off of their program, their waiver program, or Medicaid. So the way that you protect them now and in the future is with the special needs trust. Now, that's a third party trust. We also have a self-settled trust or a first party supplemental needs trust. And the type of funds that you would use, that you would put into that trust, are either settlements from a personal injury lawsuit, or what's more likely, it's for used in a divorce. So in Texas, we have something called indefinite child support. If you have a child with special needs who will require substantial care, you can have the obligor parent pay child support for the rest of that child's life. And so that is it would be paid into the first party trust, not to the other parent directly or through Office of the Attorney General. It would be paid to that parent as trustee of that first party trust. And so a lot of parents didn't know this. And this is kind of why we focused Phyllis Law Firm into focused it to help families with children with special needs, because there's lots of wonderful family law attorneys out there, but they may not know about the ramifications of how child support affects the child's eligibility for benefits. The problem is Social Security Administration, who administers SSI and Medicaid, they deem child support as unearned income against the child. So you may have done the right thing by asking your attorney to get indefinite child support for your child, but then they didn't put it payable to a trust. And so then Social Security, once your child comes off of the interest list for the Medicaid waiver programs, or once they qualify on their own for SSI and Medicaid after they turn 18, they're going to have the child support counted against them. And if it's a significant amount of child support, then it's going to disqualify that child from getting SSI and Medicaid. So it's
been on me about this since we were on the waiting list. So what happens if you don't have an SNT and you're on the waiting list and your child suddenly has over $2,000 in assets?
So then they won't qualify. So one of the things about the Medicaid waiver programs is they waive looking at household income and household assets, and they just focus on the disabled applicant's household income and assets. And so if they have inherited one half of the house or received money paid to them because you listed them on your life insurance, or if you didn't have a will to begin with. And so by the state's intestacy laws, it depends on your state, but in Texas, if you're not married but you have children and you die without a will, you're dying intestate. And so the default rules apply, which means your kids instantly inherit everything that you have, which will be most likely valued over $2,000. So then, now that they're dealing with your death, they're also having to deal with getting back on Medicaid and SSI and getting their benefits back. So everything halts. Everything, all their therapies, the respite care, the personal care, all that stops if they've been receiving that through the Medicaid waiver program or through Medicaid, and then they inherit. So it's a simple fix.
Yeah, and sorry, go ahead.
Seamus has a hand raised.
Yes, and I wanted to. Can I do this? I don't know if I can do this. There you go, please.
Okay, so Kelly and I are both on this call. We're divorced parents of 3 kids with Duchenne. And then when you were talking about third-party trust, is it a better idea to have 3 different third-party trusts for our boys since they all have Duchenne, or one third-party trust to include all 3 of them? Because they all 3 have Duchenne. So that's kind of where I'm like, I don't know where to go with this.
So in Texas, you only have one trust per person. So you would have to get 3 separate trusts. Now you can, in the trust agreement, determine who would be the future beneficiaries in the event that your child passes. And then if the trust was funded, you can determine where those funds go. But you will have to have 3 individual trusts for estate planning purposes and for their protection.
Thank you very
And so, and Kelly asked a question: do we need separate trusts or combined by us? 2 estates times 3.
Okay, so so this is one thing that I've seen attorneys do, and I really am very much against it. I have seen people who will pay for a will, and in the will it says, if my grandson Charlie, who has DMD, survives me, then I want his interest to go into a trust that's created at that time, a third-party trust. Well, everybody's waiting around. There's no trust, so no one can utilize that trust, and it's only contingent upon certain things happening that it ever even gets drafted. What I suggest is that you have 1 trust per person, and so per individual, and everybody points to that trust. Everybody meaning mom, dad, grandparents, friends, family. Once, Lindy, I told you, once we get the trust agreement signed and executed, and we have that taxpayer ID number, you get to draft this wonderful message and share it with all the family and friends and say, hey, if you want to leave anything to my son, now you cannot mess with his benefits. Please go forward. We have a bank account over at Chase or Wells Fargo, and they can freely pay into this trust. So have 1 trust per child.
And we'll get to that in a little bit, but that is an important part. Whenever we got the trust set up, my mom altered a little bit of language in her will, so she didn't want to posthumously kick her son out of getting medical care. So so that was great. Let me see. Okay, and then the kicker, Leona. About how much does it cost for an SNT?
Okay, so I've kind of looked around with other attorneys too, not just myself, but the average price is about $2,500. Now that should include the supplemental needs trust agreement, the certification of trust, which is basically an abbreviated form of the trust that you would utilize if the trust is going to own and sell real property. You don't need to have the entire trust put into the real property records. You would just have the certification of trust, because the trust can own the transportation vehicles. It can own interest in businesses. It can own your house, or it can own anything, because it is an entity of it in and of itself. And so yes, $2,500. You should expect something around that amount.
And this I did have another question with this. Oh yes. So the trust is specific to the child, correct, Leona? So if you're divorced, you don't need a trust for each parent and the child. It's just the kiddo. So if you've got 2 kids and you're divorced, then it's 2,500-ish times 2, right?
And I would say this, try to work together so that you can be co-independent trustees. Even if you're divorced, you're probably still co-parenting. And so that's allowed. You don't have to just have first mom, then dad. You can have both of them, even if they're divorced, as co-trustees. Then, pick parents or cousins or aunts or uncles or family members or friends that are trustworthy, that would be on your key people list of who you trust to help take care of your child financially. That's who should be in your list of successor trustees. Does it have to go to